they'll say, oh yeah, I mean, I tried tretinoin a long time ago, it didn't really work for me. And it's like, well, what do you mean? A lot of people hear retinol and they're like, oh, I should be using a retinol. I cannot tell you the number of people that I've encountered since, getting into skincare, working in the industry. I mean, that's just good business for one, but two, I'm actually in the middle of getting ready to go to the pool. I'm letting the last layer that I just applied fully dry down before going into the next step. And so I figured I would watch this new video from Dr. Sam Ellis. She'll be reviewing some of her best retinol hacks, so making retinoids work more effectively. As a dermatologist, I very much trust what she has to say when it comes to retinoids. I think that generally speaking, the advice that she gives on her channel is really it's really grounded. It's very straightforward, very practical. I think that she doesn't get too far into the weeds, which is great. Some people, I think, myself included, can get a little bit caught up in some of the particulars. I think that she does a really good job of making content that, really just explains what needs explaining and then leaves the rest to the rest. So I'll go ahead and cue that up and then we'll see what she has to say.
We all know and have heard over and over again that retinol is the gold standard when it comes to anti-aging skincare, with its ability to tighten and firm the skin, help with fine lines, wrinkles, tone, texture, you name it, retinol does it. However, I find as a dermatologist that not everyone uses this ingredient to its fullest potential to get those maximum benefits. So today, as a dermatologist, I'm sharing all of my retinol secrets to help you get the most out of this amazing anti-aging product.
Just off the bat, in terms of a lot of people just not really maximizing the benefits of retinoids, I think that a lot of people, they hear retinol and they're like, oh, I should be using a retinol. And then it's like, okay, well, are you? And a lot of them will say no. A lot of them have, for some reason, I think it's a little bit surprising to me, but I think a lot of people are still very much afraid to use them because they have this sense that like your face is just going to fall off. And it might, but I mean, you'll get past that. And I think it's just interesting because people will very readily purchase, a new toner, a new essence, a new serum with a random plant extract. People will do that 20,000 times before they actually dial in their retinoid. I'm going to stop talking and let her continue.
I'm so happy to have you here. I'm Dr. Sam Ellis. I'm a board certified dermatologist in Northern California, and I created this channel to help you understand your skin and hair and nails and find products and sometimes even procedures that work for you. So if you like that type of content, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you never miss a video, and give this one a thumbs up. Also, little shout out to Haru Haru Wonder, who's partnering with me on this video. If you're not familiar, they are an amazing Korean skincare brand that you can find on Amazon. I love their products so much. I've been recommending them for years. I feel like they do affordable, sensitive skin friendly skincare so well. And a little bit later in this video, I'm going to be talking about their awesome retinol product. I really wanted to make this video because I have found that with the rise in social media, more and more people know what retinol is. They understand that it's a great anti-aging skincare ingredient that's going to help with fine lines, texture, tone, brightening of the skin, but they were never really taught how to pick a good retinol, how to really incorporate it into their routine successfully, and how to get the most out of it. So that's what this video is all about. It's my tips and tricks that you can apply.
I'll also just say one of the other reasons why a lot of people maybe never really got on board with a retinoid is because they got a prescription from a dermatologist for tretinoin, and they, like she said, knew that it was supposed to be fantastic because the doctor told them that it would be, but then were never really given the tools necessary in order to make it successful. And I think that that's why content like this is very useful because, I mean, I cannot tell you the number of people that I've encountered since, getting into skincare, working in the industry, and people talk about how they were prescribed a retinoid because I'll ask them about retinoids because I'm so obsessed with them and they've transformed my skin. And I'll ask them about them and they'll say, oh yeah, I mean, I tried tretinoin a long time ago, it didn't really work for me. And it's like, well, what do you mean? If you're somebody that never really learned how to make it tolerable, or maybe it wasn't even that bad, but you just didn't know what to expect because nobody told you, then, if your skin starts flaking and it's red and irritated, then, on some level, it would probably be within reason to say, you know what, I'm going to maybe not do this because clearly my skin doesn't like it. So if you don't really know what to expect, if you don't know what the the tips and tricks are, then obviously that's not going to work out very well. So on some level, I empathize with people because I know that they've had poor experiences. They weren't set up for success by their provider, whether that's a dermatologist or an esthetician even. I mean, we sell very potent retinoids in our clinic, and it is so important to me every time somebody walks away with a retinoid that they have the tools necessary in order to make it successful. I mean, that's just good business for one, but two, because they're so transformative, making sure that people know what they're doing. I mean, it's just it's a non-negotiable for me.
To your everyday retinol practice so that you can get the most anti-aging benefits. And with that, let's start with tip number one, which I feel like makes all of the difference in the world with how successful you are going to be on this retinol journey, which is to start with a low potency retinol. Retinol in and of itself comes in different strengths. And if you want to go even more powerful, you can then bump up to retinaldehyde, which is also available over the counter at drugstores, online, etc. Or you can even push past that to prescription retinoids like tretinoin. And something I've noticed so much more in the past few years are patients coming into my clinic having never used any type of retinoid at all. So they've never even used like a gentle retinol. And right out of the gate, they want to get prescription tretinoin. And particularly for patients who have more sensitive skin, rosacea, eczema, etc., that is not always the best idea. Tretinoin is fantastic. It's very well studied in its ability to walk back those signs of aging. However, it is pretty irritating to the skin. And there are lots of people that no matter how hard they try will never be able to tolerate tretinoin. And there's more people who on their tretinoin journey get really discouraged because they have so much irritation, breakouts, etc. when they're trying to acclimate to that product. So when we're talking about incorporating topical retinoids for cosmetic use, it is almost always my recommendation to start with a gentle retinol or retinaldehyde product.
I was going to say, and she basically caveated it perfectly, that there are some cases where like somebody comes to me and they like, for example, have really significant breakouts, but they also have really like robust, oily skin. And it's like, you could start with a retinol and you probably would have a better time adjusting to tretinoin or adjusting to something like adapalene if you were to start with the less potent retinoid before moving on to something prescription strength. But at the same time, there's something to be said about some individuals being given the situation, right? Because minimizing the risk of scarring, for example, in particular, in the case of acne, particularly if you're somebody with a higher Fitzpatrick type and you are really prone to that post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation, I don't really want to bother with any of these like cosmetic retinoids, really. What I would probably say is if somebody was like really sensitive, but like the acne was really significant, I mean, I would maybe recommend they start with maybe the 0.1% retinaldehyde cream serum from Naturium. I mean, she pictured the retinaldehyde cream serum there earlier. And that, I think, like using retinol, for example, as the first line of defense, I really don't think is the person that I would recommend that to is someone that's extremely sensitive. Because even if you are not somebody that's trying to deal with something, more medical, like acne, for example, because like what she was saying, like for cosmetic purposes, like, retinol, retinaldehyde, totally fine. But if you're somebody that's trying to use these products as a means to address a skin issue like acne, if that's what you're trying to do, then, I mean, I really want you to get started with something as potent as possible, as soon as possible. And I think that retinaldehyde is just so well tolerated. I feel like it's even more tolerable than retinol, which is it's so interesting. But it also has the added benefit of having some antimicrobial action. So particularly for those with acne, I kind of just skip the retinol. I just go straight to the retinaldehyde. And the one from Naturium is fantastic.
Allow your skin to acclimate to that. See what it does for your skin. A lot of people never need to go to something more potent because they see so many benefits with retinol alone without having that irritation, peeling, flaking, etc. that is sometimes unavoidable with these higher strength products. In the past, I've made a video about my favorite beginner retinol products, and now I feel like I need to add this one to the list. This is the Haru Haru Wonder Black Rice Night Night Retinol Serum, and woo, it's so good. They even
I need to go and apply a layer of moisturizer and let that dry down so that I can then put on some sunscreen. But I'll be interested to see what she says about this product because I've said this before. I think that generally speaking, Japanese skincare, Korean skincare, I think Haru Haru is a Korean line. They never really impress me with the retinoids because they're always super weak. And it's like, it's nice, but I don't know. They never really take it to the next step when you're talking about retinoids or exfoliants even. So I'm always a little bit like, is that really going to do much? But at the same time, I have no idea what the concentration of retinol is in this particular product. So maybe it is a little bit more effective, but I'll be right back. Let's see.
Even put it directly on their packaging for beginners. I love that they're owning that. This is truly a formula that is designed with sensitive skin and newbie to retinol skin in mind. Not only does it have that 0.08% microencapsulated retinol, and that microencapsulation is really great because it helps keep the...
Okay, so I was going to say, it probably, when it says like for beginners, so on and so forth, I was expecting something that was probably like a 0.1% because that's fairly typical of a product that, you know, is marketed in that particular way. It would not, I can tell you right now, I would not recommend this product because 0.08 is even less than 0.1. 0.1 is so low, like very effective penetration of a 0.08% retinol is not the same as standard penetration of a 0.3, for example. I would recommend that somebody start with 0.3 because that is generally where you will see, you know, visible results with minimal irritation for individuals that, you know, are new to retinoids. So I would never really recommend that somebody start with something with anything less than a 0.3. I actually really like the Paula's Choice 0.3% retinol with 2% bakuchiol. I think that that's a really unique formula because one study that came out like a while ago that found you can achieve similar cosmetic outcomes using a 1% bakuchiol twice daily as you would with a 1% retinol once daily. So interestingly, using that 2% bakuchiol once a day, because it has the retinol, the 0.3, so you won't use that in the morning, you're potentially getting the benefit of a 1% retinol, some of the benefit, right? Because the benefits they don't overlap perfectly, right? But we're talking about collagen stimulation, pore clearance, general textural improvements. Those are things that you can see with bakuchiol. And so you're getting a potentially very effective concentration of bakuchiol while also still acclimating your skin to the true retinoid, which is that 0.3% retinol, meaning that you're potentially getting more benefit than you would have gotten with just the 0.3% retinol, but you're not adding too much irritation risk. So you're potentially getting an improved result, but you're still helping your skin to begin to acclimate to the true retinoid, meaning that you'll then be able to graduate to a higher strength product. Whether your end goal is a prescription tretinoin, for example, or not, being able to tolerate something like a really high percentage retinaldehyde is certainly something to strive towards when we're talking about maximizing the benefits, because particularly with cosmetic retinoids, I mean, depending upon the situation, a lot of them are just very, very weak. And doing what you can within the cosmetic space, so before you step into a prescription product, to really, you know, max out the benefits, I think is, for a lot of people, particularly those that have like an actual concern that they're trying to address, because you can, you know, have a couple spots here or there without thinking that you need to be, you know, on prescription tretinoin to resolve that, and you probably don't need to be. But if you're trying to just really make sure that you're getting the most bang for buck when it comes to a retinoid, particularly in the cosmetic space, increasing the concentration and switching toward a more retinaldehyde focused routine, I think, is ultimately going to be where you're going to get the most results.
Keep the retinol stable and penetrating the skin really evenly. But this formula has so many other skin supporting goodies in there. It's got 1% bakuchiol, which is another really nice anti-aging skincare ingredient that's sort of going to piggyback off of and enhance the benefits that you're already getting from your retinol. This formula also has ceramides and sunflower seed oil and that black rice ferment that Haru Haru Wonder products are so well known for. And those are going to work together to keep your skin soft and smooth and protected and hydrated while you're building up that retinol use. The texture of this is also gorgeous. It is like a true milky serum. It just blends so perfectly on the skin. It layers well with other skincare products. Plus, this product is affordable. You can get it on Amazon. Just huge fan. I have no doubts that if you try this, you will not be disappointed. But now let's move on to some other tips and tricks you can use to get the most out of whatever retinol product you're using. You may have heard of the sandwich method when it comes to applying your retinoid. And what that really means is you're applying a layer of moisturizer, then your retinol product, then another layer of moisturizer. So sandwiching your retinol between two layers of moisture to help you tolerate the product better. And that can work really well in terms of not getting irritated. But if you have a really thick layer of moisturizer underneath your retinol, then there's sort of this thought of like, well, is that decreasing the penetration of my retinol? And does that make using a retinol even worth it to me? So rather than sandwiching between two layers of moisturizer, I like to do a sandwich where we're putting on some type of hydrating or skin supporting serum, then our retinol, then a moisturizer on top. The beauty of using a serum or multiple serums underneath your retinol.
This is a very interesting take. I think, like, so Dr. Sam Bunting, for example, has talked about concerns around buffering, or you minimizing penetration. Generally speaking, the consensus is that you're probably decreasing the rate of absorption. But if the product gets on your face, provided we're not talking about something extremely occlusive like an ointment, so like Vaseline, Aquaphor, any other such product that like really is like very much forming a barrier, right? Like that's certainly going to impede penetration. But with a standard moisturizer, I really cannot imagine it being a problem. And it's interesting that she would put it this way because having a hydrating product underneath, depending upon the particulars of that formula, like if it was just a hyaluronic acid, for example, you're potentially increasing penetration, which can potentially increase irritation. So I'll be interested to see if she clarifies that further.
Is that you're still getting a little bit of buffering and cushion and support to your skin before you're putting that retinol on. But those serums are not generally occlusive, so they are not going to inhibit that retinol's ability to penetrate into the skin. For example, I will often take my Prequel Multi-Quench Hydration Serum and put a layer of that on first before I go in with my retinoid. Even though I've been using retinoids for so long, I still have rosacea and sensitive skin, and I like having a little bit of a buffer. Plus, I like that instant hydration and plumping I get from the serum while I'm sort of waiting for those long-term results of my retinoid. And then, in addition to that, that serum gives a slight bit of slip to the skin so that when I go in with my retinoid, it's much easier for me to easily distribute a small amount of product because we're not using a lot when we're using a retinoid, and just ensure that it's getting everywhere that I want it to go. Now, if you want to amp up your anti-aging benefits even more, you could think about layering a peptide serum underneath your retinoid. Peptides and retinoids are very complementary when it comes to anti-aging benefits. So for example, the May Love Peptide Squad, the peptide serum from Medicate, love both of those, really good peptide blends. You can put that right under there, and now you're getting multiple skin enhancing benefits, plus you're getting a little bit of protection from that serum. But what I've been doing a lot lately is actually incorporating a peptide moisturizer on top of my retinol. So I'm doing the sandwich, but I'm doing my hydration serum, then my retinoid, then a peptide moisturizer. You guys know I love this one from Allies of Skin. So many good peptides in here. And in particular, this one.
So very interesting because the serum that she's talking about, the multi-quench, that is a hydrating serum. It is not like an emulsion with moisturizing ingredients, right? Like you can sometimes have a hydrating serum, like a more milky texture to it that like has true moisturizing agents in there, like oils, that will act as a bit of a buffer because they're going to sit, so to speak, on the surface and act as a little bit of a barrier between whatever is being applied afterwards and the skin. But that is like a hyaluronic acid product. So I would expect that it would be not the peptides thing, but the multi-quench, it would be like using like the ordinary, for example, the ordinary hyaluronic acid serum. That would be a comparable switch. That to me is a very interesting approach from a dermatologist. But I think that there's something really cool about what she said, because one of the key points that she's making is that it's not just about making sure that you're able to tolerate the product, and so potentially layering something underneath to reduce the risk of redness, irritation, dryness. She's also specifically calling out the fact that you are going to be able to apply the small amount of product, the small amount of retinoid, across the full field more effectively than if you were to just go on to dry skin. I mean, I don't know that she actually said versus dry skin, but this is something that I've always thought you had to kind of work to strike a balance between, because, and this is why I actually like the idea of layering it, because if the serum has a little bit more of a moisturizing, more emollient formula, then you are still getting some of that buffering effect. If that product also has humectants like hyaluronic acid that could potentially increase the penetration of certain ingredients. Generally speaking, it's like there's a lot of pros and cons because the hydration from the serum can help to facilitate more effective barrier function. More effective barrier function is going to mean increased tolerance to things like retinoids. But then at the same time, you're increasing the penetration of the retinoid, so potentially increasing the irritation. There's a lot of back and forth. I think generally speaking, it's just a matter of finding what works for you. But I do really strongly believe that there is something to be said about using some kind of product underneath your retinoid, whether that is a moisturizing serum, a moisturizer, something to allow for that slip, because it really does help you to get so much more playtime or mileage out of that small amount of product, particularly if you're somebody that's using like a cream based retinoid, like a lot of the tretinoin formulations, for example, are creams, and applying those on dry skin would be a nightmare. Like I've used those formulas, and applying it on dry skin is not fun. And the other thing too is that you're not just talking about potentially reduced spread, because you might be getting, hot spots because maybe the retinoid isn't spreading very evenly across the skin because you don't have any of that slip. The other thing too is that the friction associated with applying anything on dry skin, well, almost anything. There are some formulas that actually go onto dry skin very well, very, very well. And that's, a different conversation. But when you're talking about something like a retinoid, just like having to rub the skin to get that product to spread across the full face, to me, that's a risk for irritation, And so you really do have to strike a balance. Like, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the routine that she's outlined. I think it's actually totally fine. I do something very similar, but I'm also fully acclimated to the retinoids that I'm using. And so I'm not really worried about potentially, increasing I would like to increase the efficacy of the retinoids that I'm using. So I kind of want that added penetration. But I think that generally speaking, you have to really caveat the recommendation to use a hydrating serum underneath your retinoid. So to me, it's very interesting that she would give that as a recommendation.
This one has palmitoyl tripeptide 8, which is anti-inflammatory. So it's particularly good if you're using a retinoid and you're worried about getting irritation from that, because this is also going to be calming and soothing. So using a serum is one way to help distribute a retinoid very evenly over your facial skin. But the other thing I tend to recommend is something called the tiny dot method. This is particularly helpful if you are using a thicker, richer, creamier retinoid product, because when it comes to retinoids, for your entire face, you only need a pea-sized amount or a chocolate chip sized amount. And most people will look at that amount and go, well, how the heck am I supposed to get that over my entire
And honestly,
face?
so is a
So this
pea.
is what you're going to do. You're going to squeeze your retinoid onto the tip of your finger. You are going to split that retinoid between your two fingertips. And then you are going to start on your forehead or at the periphery of your face and make tiny little dots all around your face, working from the periphery towards the center. Once you have all those tiny dots distributed, then you are going to use your fingertips to sort of connect the dots. I think once you start applying your retinoid this way, it's pretty hard to go back. The other purpose of having you start at the periphery of your face with that tiny dot method is that by the time you get towards the center of your face, you have slightly less product there, and these areas tend to get a lot more irritated. So by distributing slightly less retinoid to the center of your face, you're going to have less flaking and peeling in those areas. Now, if you're still getting irritation in those,
so I'm a huge fan of the Dr. Sam Bunting 13 dot technique. Not necessarily because it will mean that you're going to end up with, less product around the nose, around the mouth, around the eyes. It's interesting that she would use that as the justification, because I think generally I would rather just apply something like a moisturizer around the area that I'm trying to protect and then aim for a very even spread across the rest of the face. Because the other thing too, this area, that's where my pores are the most prominent. That's where I'm, like my nose, for example. I mean, I'm very prone to breakouts, in this area. So I would not want any less product there. But I also, we go back to this whole conversation, like you might be getting a little bit too into the weeds if you start talking about, like you've faded your retinol almost. I don't know to what extent that's really doing very much. I think if I really wanted to make sure that somebody avoided overdosing on a retinoid in these key areas, I would just say make sure that you're applying a moisturizer or some kind of like Vaseline, for example, as a dedicated step to those particular areas. Then apply your retinol or your retinoid, your retinol, your retinaldehyde, your prescription product like what she was using. I think that that's just a more practical way of approaching it. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think the dots, across the face, I think particularly for people that are sensitive, using like the tiny dot method as she calls it, or the 13 dot method from Dr. Sam Bunting, something like that, where like you're very consciously like allocating the product and you're not just applying it the way you would apply like a moisturizer, right? Like where you just kind of take that all over the face indiscriminately, being very conscious about the application, however you want to do that, whether it's, using this particular method, applying moisturizer or an ointment to these key areas, whatever the case is. I think that just being aware of where that product is going, particularly when it's a prescription strength product, is going to be really useful. So whatever you have to do in order to make that work. If you're somebody that doesn't have a particular sensitivity in these areas, then, like, for example, my eyes never have any problem. I take prescription retinoids all around my eyes all the time, never have a single issue. But my lips, they will start peeling. They will start peeling. And like the sides of my nose, 100%. But my eyes are totally fine. So I don't really bother creating any kind of barrier around my eyes when I'm applying my retinoid. I mean, that's not that, but that's unique to me, So figuring out what works for you, figuring out where your areas of sensitivity are, I think is going to be really useful for a lot of people too, because then you know what you need to actually be careful with. So for an individual that's, just getting started or just making the transition from, a cosmetic grade retinoid to a prescription product, almost assuming that you're going to be irritated, I think is probably the best way to go.
Those areas, that's when I recommend a technique called pre-slugging. Traditional slugging is where you take a petrolatum-based product like Vaseline or Aquaphor and you apply it over the entirety of your skincare to lock everything in. The opposite of that is pre-slugging, where you take Vaseline or Aquaphor or some other type of occlusive ointment and you apply it to your skin before you go in with your retinoid so that it acts as a buffer and reduces penetration of your retinoid to those more sensitive areas. I love this method, especially for the more sensitive areas of the face, like around the eyes, the little crook of the nose, and around the mouth and lips, because I find that a lot of people get irritation in those areas and then they stop using their retinol in its entirety because they can't tolerate it in certain spots on their face. So instead, if you just pre-slug those areas, then you can continue to get the benefits of your retinoid elsewhere. Even with doing all of those things, if you cannot tolerate your retinoid every night, I'm going to ask you to drop your retinoid down to every other night or even every third night. But another tip is on the nights that you are not using your retinoid, don't just use your regular moisturizer on your skin. Use a true barrier support and repair product. And those are going to be products like the La Roche-Posay Cicaplast Balm or the Rhode Barrier Butter, love that one, or the Prequel Skin Utility Balm. All of these are going to be thicker, richer, more skin supporting, more reparative, more soothing to your skin so that on the next night when you go in with your retinoid, your skin is actually ready to receive it and benefit from it. Now, another thing that's going to affect the efficacy of your retinoid product is
I think that that's a fantastic recommendation. It's one of the things, like particularly for the people that are just getting started, because again, if you are going into this assuming that you're going to experience some level of irritation, then you're going to be, one, less surprised when you do, and two, you're going to be making other changes to your routine so that you are preempting those potential outcomes. One of the things that people will often talk about is how when you're introducing a retinoid, maybe not something like the Haru Haru one, but when you're introducing like a meaningful concentration, like a 0.3% retinol when you were not using any retinol, or going from 0.3 to 0.5 or to a 1%, or, whatever the case is. If you're increasing the concentration or the strength, or you're incorporating this and it's of a reasonable strength, being sure to reduce the frequency of use or the use altogether of products that themselves have some irritant potential. So your exfoliants, stuff like that, not just on the days when you're using the product, but also on those off days, because you don't want to be, further breaking down your barrier on those off days, because then you're going to be less able to tolerate the retinoid on those days when you actually do use it. So I think sometimes people, they oversimplify it to their detriment, because you could just say your routine is exactly the same. only on these days you use the retinoid and on these days you don't. I mean, that's fine, and it probably wouldn't be for many people. But for example, one of the things that I recommend, like one of the brands that we sell in our office is Sanitas. They have a product called Topical C, which really is just like a balm. And so you can use it in a similar way to like Vaseline. I think that it's a little bit more cosmetically elegant and it kind of feels a little nicer on the skin than Vaseline, but it is a very occlusive product. I would never recommend that you use something like that over a retinoid unless you were someone like myself that was very much acclimated to these products, because it can increase the penetration of the retinoid if you apply it on top of the retinoid. That being said, for those off nights when you are not using the retinoid, if you are just, cleansing, maybe you have like a hydrating serum or something going in with a moisturizer, seal that in with something like Topical C, with something like the Skin Utility Balm, with like just straight Vaseline, whatever the case is, because that's going to really reinforce the barrier on those off nights, really set you up for success. And I mean, ultimately, there's nothing that having hydrated skin is not going to help, right? Assuming, of course, you're not someone that is really susceptible to breakouts following the application of some of these more occlusive products. I mean, some people find that they cause breakouts, some people don't find that they cause any problems at all. So as long as you have a product, like a more occlusive product like that, that you think works well for you, lean into that on those off nights. Because like she said, I mean, you're going to be setting yourself up for success. And at the end of the day, having, a really robust skin barrier is always useful, not just when you're using retinoids. So anything that you can do to really reinforce the skin, particularly on those nights when you're not using something that is taxing the skin ultimately, I think is going to be really useful.
Whether or not it's expired. Now, I'm sure this seems really obvious, but all the time I have patients coming in, bringing in the products that they're using. I'm looking through them and their retinoid expired many months, if not years ago. This is particularly important for retinol and retinaldehyde because those ingredients are notoriously unstable. So if you're using expired product, it's just not going to be working that well. And it's not as simple as just looking at the expiration date, because once you open the product, you actually need to defer to something else called the period after opening symbol, which is also going to be on the packaging. And that tells you how many months that product is going to be good or stable or fresh after you open it. And for most retinoids, that's 3 to 6 months. So don't waste your time applying unstable, ineffective retinol. And those are my top retinoid tips. I hope you found this video helpful.
I really, really like a lot of her content. I think that she does a really great job of explaining a lot of these concepts. I think that some of these tips probably could have used a little bit more explanation. I mean, I'm a pretty long-winded person, which I think is probably pretty obvious at this point. But in particular, the note about the hydrating serum underneath, again, a fantastic routine for the right person. I think that I would just want to be a little bit more careful recommending that. The other piece being like the tiny dot method. I think the tiny dot method probably would have been better if she just removed the conversation about the change in concentration, like the fading basically into the center of the face. Because, and I mentioned like, just walling off those areas with something like a moisturizer or ointment, which is what she ultimately used when she resumed the demo or went in with another tip. I think it would have simplified that step a little bit more, because the goal really is just to make sure that you're getting your product across the full field, right? Because people are always like, well, that's just not very much product, so on and so forth. Using tiny dot method, using the 13 dot technique, all of these different dotting techniques. I mean, whatever you have to do to get the product to just spread more evenly. But I do really, really appreciate her point about making sure that you can effectively spread the product across the full field. That's something that I don't think gets enough attention, to be honest. I think people like dermatologists a lot of the time. So it's interesting actually that she did not follow the same advice that a lot of doctors do. But I think a lot of dermatologists just default to that apply on dry skin because they know that that will reduce penetration. But I think it just doesn't really account for, the specifics, how the routine ultimately works, right? I think the friction piece, getting uneven spread, I think you'd be much better off just going straight in with your moisturizer, even on damp skin, and then going straight in with your retinoid. I think most people would probably find that a more comfortable way to apply their product. I mean, I guess it's to each their own, right? I mean, what I would recommend for one person is not what I would recommend for the other. So there's always going to be a situation where a given piece of advice doesn't really apply. But generally speaking, I think that these tips were fantastic. Starting low, going slow when it comes to first incorporating a retinoid. I would start a little bit higher and a little bit faster than she did with the Haru Haru. But, for somebody that kind of just wants to have vitamin A working in the background, but like isn't really trying to address anything, I'm sure it's a fantastic product. There's a reason that she's recommending it. But to what extent it's really going to change your skin, I think that's where, I get a little bit suspicious. I think that these are fantastic recommendations. They just have to be the right recommendations for the right person. And I'm sure she would agree. You're never going to be able to include all of the caveats in every single video, because every single video would be as long as this one has been. And that's not practical. So I don't fault her for any of these recommendations. I think if you are a consumer of her content, basically all of the caveats that I've made, I think would probably be present in some of her other videos. These are hacks in the sense that they're just one-off things that could potentially improve your experience. I don't think that she would ever say that an 11-minute long video could be a comprehensive guide that would be able to give you all the tips, but also outline exactly who each tip is appropriate for, exactly who each tip is not appropriate for. That's not really realistic. So again, I don't fault her for any of that. But love her, love the products. I'm really excited to see where Prequel goes. And I'm always looking forward to a new video from Dr. Sam Ellis. But if you thought any of the things that I was saying today were in any way, shape, or form useful, feel free to give this video a like. Feel free to subscribe if you would like to hear more of my long-winded explanations as to who should or should not be using the tiny dot method. And then if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. And yeah, I'll see you next time.